My name is Jaideep Brar. I am with the Adobe Managed Services. I have around 10 years of AEM experience working in various roles on the support side, and on the DevOps side. So I will be taking today's session on AEM deployment and security best practices. So the agenda for today is I'll talk about the the top deployment issues that we see from in terms of tickets, in terms of common issues. So I have gathered all those, compiled that data, and uh, just made this list. So first, I'll talk about dispatcher, then activation or replication best practices, and then how to avoid manual code changes or manual OSGI changes, and then what is the right way of doing bundle updates. And then lastly, we have a short slide about Cloud Manager. And then for security best practices, I will go through various subtopics like HTTPS and default AEM password, and how do we use replication user and sample content, and how and CRXT development bundles, and CSRF configuration, which is cross-site request forgery configuration in AEM, and then what are some of the OSGI security configuration. And then we have distributed denial of service prevention in AEM, and how can we use that. And then we have our denial of service from asset download servlet. And then lastly, we have like WebDAV on how we can prevent security concern from WebDAV. Okay. So moving to the first topic on the best practices for dispatcher. So whenever our dispatcher installation is done, there are some default files which are called out-of-the-box files. So on the right-hand side of my screen, I have listed all the default files, and there is another term which is used, which is called immutable, meaning these files should not be changed. These are just provided as a reference. So let's take the second file, which is aem author.vhost. So this is a vhost for default like installation. This will be present on all AMS instances. But if you want to create a like a test.com site, and you need to have a vhost for that. So the recommended practice is to copy this file, change the name to test_vhost, and then change the vhost entries in that, so that dispatcher picks up that configuration or that vhost based on your configuration. So similarly for flush and for rewrite rules, there is a base rewrite rule file, and it is recommended that whenever you have to put in some custom rewrite rule, always copy this file, then do your changes in that copied file, and so that you always have this as a reference, and then you keep on adding to your custom files. Similarly for farm files, there is an author and publish default farm file, and if you have 10 farms, you can just copy this file 10 times and then change the configuration of the farm file based on your configuration. So this is best practice, that do not change any out of the box dispatcher files, but copy those files just for reference and then make your changes. If you remove the immutable flag from these files, and make changes, that this can cause unwanted issues. So it's always best practice to not change any out of the box file and then just update your project specific files. Okay, moving on to deployment best practices, which is like the replication part of the session. So there is a tree activation in AEM, and we have seen again and again that whenever there is a deployment or there are some changes, if somebody triggers a tree activation, we have seen a lot of issues with memory, a lot of issues with CPU. So it it is never recommended to use tree activation in the new AEM as a cloud services. This option is not there. So 6.5 is the last release where you can still use it, but it is not recommended to use this option, activate tree, because it causes the whole, like if you go to /content and just click on activate, it will, if you have like 100 sites, it will try to replicate those 100 sites, which is not a good idea, and we have seen it cause problems in the past. So always try to avoid it and use either go to content, cite a specific hierarchy, and then try to do some activation. And then other issue that we have seen is dispatcher flush at root level. So we have seen that whenever customers clear the flush, which is the dispatcher cache, the Akamai cache, or Cloudflare or CloudFront, all these cache. So whenever a cache clear is done at a root level, that forces all requests to go to the publisher, which then causes high load on the publisher. Ideally, the recommendation is to have 90 to 95% of cache hit ratio, meaning only 5 to 10% of all requests should be hitting the publisher. But whenever there is a dispatcher flush happening at a root level, that causes 100% of the requests to first go to publisher, which causes a lot of problems. So anytime we see a load or a memory issue on the publishers, 70 to 80% of the time, it's when somebody cleared a cache at a root level on the dispatcher or on the Akamai or Cloudflare. So avoid any cache clear at a root level. Like if if client libs are not showing up on the site, we should only be removing etc.clientlibs and not /root. So things like that, where we go to a particular hierarchy which is not showing up on the site and not going to the root level, will really help in maintaining a healthy AEM setup. Okay, moving on. So manual code and OSGI changes. So we have seen a lot of times where we go to CRXT, change some JS file, change CSS, or make some changes to JSP file, or like whenever we have to make OSGI configuration changes, whenever we have to set up a new logger, we always go to OSGI configuration and make the changes. So all these changes should be done via packages, because ideally we want these changes to be first tested on stage, and then once this is like tested, then we want to move those changes to prod, and that can be done via the same package. Because if you manually make changes to OSGI config, it is saved under apps system of that particular instance, and ideally OSGI configuration should be under your project specific folder, then config.author or config.publish. So things like that, where you make any changes to JS, CSS, JSP, Sitely, or OSGI configuration, all those changes should be packaged up and then deployed. That can help in lot of issues where if we think that this code deployment broke something, then we can uninstall the package. But if we keep on doing manual changes, there is no way, like if we made 10 changes, we have to go to each file, revert those changes, and then it can cause lots of problems. So having one deployment and just having it in one package will really help in maintainability of AEM, and also will cause less problems in the future. So and then just to like continue the same topic, where all the configs should not be dependent on an instance. So we should be deploying one package which has config.author.prod. So any config that only needs to be applied to author should be a child node of this, where AEM will pick this up based on the run mode. So any prod author will be picking up configuration from here. And if there are any configuration that needs to be applied to prod publish, then we just put it under this folder. So all these will be based on the run mode. If AEM detects like a publish and dev, then it would pick up configuration from this. So this way you can have one package for your stage, prod, dev, deployment, and then AEM will decide based on the run mode which configuration files to pick up. So this will really help in creating creating one package for all deployments, where you just use the same code on dev and you use the same code on prod, and then AEM will decide based on the run modes. And then moving to updating bundles. So this is a very big security concern, where we have seen we have an option of going to system console bundles, clicking on install update, and then we can actually update a jar file. So if you have a bundle jar file, you can just choose the file from here and then click on install update. That will update the bundle. But problem with this approach is, first of all, this is not recommended by the product team, and second, if something goes wrong and you will have to remove this bundle, there is no way you can remove this because there is no like uninstall bundle option here. So the best way is to package up your bundle as part of package, and then once you install that package and then it breaks something, if you remove that package, AEM will automatically remove that bundle and then restore the last known version, which will be the older version. So this is one of the issues that I have seen happen a lot of times. So a lot of sharing, and then lastly, to make sure all the best practices are followed, we have Adobe Cloud Manager, which is sort of a deployment. You can think of it as a deployment tool, which is provided by Adobe, which automates most of the things that we have talked about in the last few slides, where you just have a code in a Git repository, you have your CSS, JS, your Sling models, your Java code, everything is under Git. And then you trigger a pipeline which will take your code from your Git repository. It will build the code based on your POM configuration. It will create UI packages, config packages, And then it will perform some unit testing based on what you have defined in the code. It will also perform code inspection. Just an example, if you are storing password in a plain text, it will flag that as a critical like vulnerability. And we have around 200 of the SonarQube tests that we run. So it performs code inspection, and then then the code is deployed to stage. And then after that, there are some security tests, which we will talk about in the next few slides, where it will test how you have configured AEM security. And if this process finds that there are some missing elements on AEM security, it will not let that pipeline proceed. Then it performs performance testing, which is just trying to mimic the prod load on stage, and then making sure that the code that we are deploying to prod can sustain the load on stage. And then once all these tests are done, then finally code is deployed to prod. So Cloud Manager can really help in taking care of all the security or all the deployment issues that we have seen in the in the last few slides, and also some of the security issues that we will see going forward. And we have a lot of customers using Cloud Manager. Okay, so I'll stop here for a second. Anybody have any questions till now? Okay. Okay, moving on to security best practices. So the first common problem that we see is not configuring HTTPS on both author and publish. It is mandatory, and it is part of the product security guidelines that any prod instance that is live to like internet should have HTTPS configured. And AEM has a default SSL setup where you can update the private key certificate, and then it will configure the SSL based on whatever data you provide in here. So that is recommended. And then whenever AEM is first started up, it is always recommended to change the default AEM password. On the AMS side, both of these things are done by default. So anytime AMS starts up a new instance, it will have an HTTPS configured, and also a default password will be changed on first startup. So default password admin will be changed, and if somehow it is not changed, this can cause a big security problem. So always try to change this password in the first startup. And moving on, so we have replication agents which will be used to send data from author to publish, and by default it uses admin user. So admin user and admin password. So we should not be using the default admin user because admin user have a lot of permissions that are outside of replication. So we ideally we want to create a user here which only has access to the content that needs to be replicated, and not to the content that is not to be replicated. So if we use admin user, it has access to libs directory, apps directory, etc, and all the other things. But we only want to use this user for replication. So ideally create a user and provide that user with just the access and the replication rights on the content that we think might be replicated. Okay. And moving on, so and then we should also check if there is sample content present. So sample content is geometrics, retail, weekend. If an AEM instance is started with no sample content, there no sample content run mode, there should not be any sample content. But if you see any sample content on the AEM instance, you can go to package manager and remove any geometrics, weekend, or retail bundles. Any prod instance should not have any sample content. Okay, and then for the prod instances, we need to check if CRXT and CRX Explorer bundles are on. So this is a security best practice that on prod author and prod publish, CRXTE should be disabled. The bundle should be stopped, and the same for CRX Explorer. This bundle should be stopped because have been some security concerns with with these two bundles. If a user gets access to CRXT, they can move around nodes and then cause all sorts of problem. And same with CRX Explorer. If you need to do some operations that can only be done from CRX Explorer, like creating a namespace, the recommended way is to do that on dev instance or QA instance, then create a package of that and then deploy to prod. And then we should not be using these two functionalities on prod author or prod publish instances. Then talking about CSRF configuration. So AEM by default ships with CSRF framework protection, and you can see it is in the OSGI configuration manager. The configuration is named as Apache Sling Preferer filter, which acts as a layer of firewall, and by default it will block all post, put, and delete request. It will not block get request. Anytime somebody is trying to make changes to AEM via post, put, or delete, this configuration will get triggered and it will filter out request. So if there is a third party, like you have SAML configured, so SAML IDP will make a post call to AEM to make sure users can log in from SAML to AEM. So in those cases, we need to allow the IDP host to make call to AEM. If we don't do it, then your SAML connection will fail. So the point I'm trying to make is that we should only allow hosts to make post, put, or delete calls to AEM that we know are valid hosts. Like if there is any third-party connection like IDP, SAML, or any like Elasticsearch server you have, so all those can be added to allow host, and only those hosts will be allowed to make changes to AEM from third-party calls. And never check allow empty, which will allow all requests, even if they are missing a referrer or even if it's empty. So never check this option, and always set up specific hosts that will be allowed to make post, put, and delete calls to AEM. And that will protect against the cross-site request forgery. That is a big security concern. Okay. And moving on, so there is an OSGI configuration named Adobe Granite HTML Library Manager, which basically controls how the CSS and JS files will be stored or will be loaded in AEM. So for production deployments, it is recommended to enable the minify option, which will remove any new line or any white space characters. This will improve performance. And then we have debug option. This should only be used on dev or QA instance in case we want to do some debugging if one JavaScript is loading and other is not. And then enable gzip, which will allow files to be zipped together and accessed as one request. And then there is an option to disable debug. Again, this should not be used on prod. And then we disable timing. This is also only for debugging purpose. This should not be turned on the prod, author, and publish instances. Okay, and then moving on to distributed denial of service prevention. This is to prevent any services, any bots or something which can cause a DDoS attack on server. So if we go to localhost and 4502.json, this will dump the whole repository, and how much data it shares when you put .json is controlled by Apache Sling Get Servlet. By default, it only allows 1,000 results to be shared. And so this is the default configuration. This is done to prevent if we change this to like 1 million, then anytime somebody tries to access localhost 4502.json, it will dump all the like 1 million nodes. If you have 1 million as a JSON, that can cause security concerns. So ideally, this should be set to 1,000. But if there are some functionalities that need to load JSON and they need more than 1,000, then you can change it to, let's say, 1,200. But this should be done after doing some testing, making sure it is not exposing the data that should not be printed. So this is to prevent DDoS attacks. And then we have a servlet that is used to download assets, which is called asset download servlet. And this is used whenever authenticated users issue a large and concurrent download request. If somebody gets access to this servlet on publish, they can spoof the traffic and cause the overload on the server and on the network. So by default, this component is disabled on publish. So by default, if somebody is trying to download an asset on publish, that it will not work. You will have to go to system console components and turn this option on. But on publish, it is not recommended to turn this on. This should be disabled, because if somebody can get access to this, they can cause a lot of load, a lot of traffic on publish. On author, yes, only this can be turned on because only authenticated users can have access to this. And then moving to WebDAV. So by default, on prod servers, WebDAV and DAV-EX bundles should be stopped. These are known to have some security vulnerabilities. So it is recommended to stop these bundles before going live on all prod instances. And then just lastly, it is always recommended to be on the latest service pack. For 6.5, service pack is released every quarterly. So always try to be on the latest service pack, and subscribe to Adobe Security Bulletin, which is also released once every quarter, and that provides details about any like vulnerabilities found with AEM, and then it also provides the fix that is provided by the product team. So, and then it will also send you an email whenever there is a new security bulletin, which I find very useful. So subscribing to security bulletin will be very helpful as well. Okay, so that's all from my side today. Any questions?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Sure.
You mentioned the replication user not having access to the etc directory, but if you don't give them that access, you won't be able to replicate packages from your author to your publish instances.
Yeah, so yeah, that was just like in terms of like generally saying that not providing users with more access than they need to. So yeah, if you need to like replicate packages, then yes, packages will be stored under etc packages. You need to have that access, but that is just on a user-to-user basis. We should not be providing more access than it is needed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else?
Looks like you had a question in the chat too.
Oh.
Yeah, one question in the chat. So it just said, after deployment, the bundles of CRX should be stopped.
So like the recommendation is that on prod instances, CRXD bundle should be stopped no matter what. If you are doing any deployment, deployment will be done via CRX package manager, which is a different bundle. So if you stop CRXDE, it will not affect your ability to install bundles, install packages via package manager. So ideally you want all your code, your config, your apps, everything in a package. Test it on stage. If you need to access CRXDE for anything, you need to do it on dev or QA. And then once you have the final package, then you just install that package. Turning on CRXDE on prod is never a good idea. But if in some edge cases you need to turn that on, like the recommendation will be to like turn it off right away once you're done. There is an ACS common bundle disabler, which you can use, where you can just define that these bundles should be stopped no matter what. So if somebody accidentally turns on CRXD bundle or CRX Explorer bundle, it will trigger after, I believe it's 10-15 seconds, and then it will automatically turn off that bundle. Okay, I hope that answers Shubham's question. Okay.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any questions? All right, perfect. Well, thanks, Jaideep, for your time and everything. Appreciate you presenting on this, and I'll make sure that this recording gets posted to the AEM site, as well as to the event page as well. So we should be all good there.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone. You have a good weekend. Enjoy. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks again, everybody. Have a great weekend. We'll talk soon.